Welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host here at the Gaming Gang channel. Thanks for joining me once again. It is late October, so the time is right, or maybe I should say the stars are right, for me to share my review of The Fall of Delta Green from Pelgrane Press. This is written by Kenneth Hite, and the 368-page hardcover with PDF carries an MSRP of $59.95, or you can grab just the PDF alone over at DriveThruRPG for $29.95. All that said, let's swing on over to the other camera because here I've got The Fall of Delta Green. Few things to mention before we get stuck in. First of all, the fine folks over at Pelgrane Press were kind enough to provide me with this review copy. But neither I nor anyone else affiliated with the Gaming Gang has received any other sort of compensation for me to share this review with you. These days, it's important you know that. We're also not going to look at each and every page of the book, but I do want to give you a good feel for what you're going to find inside. Then lastly, the first portion of this book is for any player. So it's for the handler, which is the term for the game master in the world of Delta Green, or the agents, which are the players. About halfway through the book, we do move into for the handler's eyes only. So as a player, if you know your game master has picked this up, maybe they've talked about buying The Fall of Delta Green, I definitely recommend when we get into that handler section, tune out. Even though I'm going to say spoiler free, just as I flip through, you're going to see things about this setting which could conceivably ruin some of the surprises. And you don't want that to happen simply because you are watching this review. Now, of course, if your game master has been kicking the idea of picking up The Fall of Delta Green around, let them know about this review so they can approach this and make a far more informed buying decision. Should mention, we have had a written review for The Fall of Delta Green up on thegaminggang.com since 2019. I do believe this came out in 2018. Sammy did the review, so you might be wondering, well, Jeff, why are you doing a video review? Well, first of all, I've always been interested in The Fall of Delta Green, so that's mainly it. Plus, Ken Hite always does great Lovecraftian content, so I'm curious about that as well. And I am going to be reviewing the Borellus Connection, which is for The Fall of Delta Green, very, very soon. And I needed to have an idea of what's going on with The Fall of Delta Green in order to review that. So that is why. And of course, as a reviewer, Sammy and I are going to differ in our opinions, obviously enough. So first thing we're going to take a look at here is the credits page. A lot of folks work very hard to bring this to life, so let's give them credit where credit is due. If you're not familiar with Delta Green, it is a Lovecraftian horror setting filled with conspiracy and shadowy government agencies. It is a great setting. It really, really is. Now, Delta Green itself began as a third-party supplement for Call of Cthulhu. It is now its own role-playing game. It is with Arc Dream Publishing, and it utilizes a D100 system, a la basic role-playing game and Call of Cthulhu with some tweaks. Now, The Fall of Delta Green, as I've already mentioned, is from Pelgrane Press. So Pelgrane Press licensed the setting from Arc Dream Publishing, and this utilizes the Gumshoe system of mechanics. And the Gumshoe system of mechanics, in a lot of ways, is very, very basic, very easy. If you need to roll a die to see if you succeed or fail, you're going to be looking to meet or exceed a target number. Could be 4, 6, or 8. And you're going to roll a 6-sided die. You might be adding points based on what abilities you have or if your fellow agents are helping you out. So pretty easy there. The big selling point to the Gumshoe system is that if you have points in an ability, so we don't have attributes, we don't have skills, it's all abilities, but there are two different kinds of abilities. So general abilities, which we see the list of here, will require a die roll for success or failure. The other abilities, which essentially fall into kind of an investigative category, you never roll dice. If you have a point in that ability, you will get the clues, you will get the information that you're looking for. Because a huge complaint over the decades with Call of Cthulhu is adventures can come to a screeching halt because players roll bad dice rolls when they're looking to get information. And that is very true. Now, myself, as a keeper who's run Call of Cthulhu for over 40 years, I don't let that happen because I don't allow my adventures to come to a screeching halt. I like my adventures to keep moving at the table. But if someone out there, a lot of keepers, a lot of game masters are like this, they play role playing games to the letter of the rules. Yeah, you can see things really go off the rails and the wheels fall off the cart in adventures that the players just roll bad dice. It happens. That will not happen in the Fall of Delta Green. It does not happen with the Gumshoe system. Now, having said that, your players need to be able to piece clues together to figure things out. So it isn't just, oh, well, here's all the answers handed to you. No. Now, as far as the system itself, just to kind of give you the bare bones info about it, if it's a general ability skill, so combat related, physical related, you're going to be rolling a 6-sided die, adding points. If you spend them from your points pool, you have to decide before you roll dice to do that. Maybe you have assistance from, other players, NPCs, what have you, might give you a bonus to that die roll. You need to meet or exceed 4, 6, or 8, depending on the difficulty, in order to succeed. Combat's similar to that, a little more crunch than that. As far as the other abilities, those investigative abilities, it's just simply, okay, I've got it. So as an example, we've got U.S. Marshal here. Criminology. You're not going to be rolling dice for that at all. Negotiation. Nope. Not rolling dice for that. Cop talk. Nope. Not rolling dice for that. So it's important to keep that in mind. Now, as far as the setting itself, Delta Green from Arc Dream Publishing takes place normally, the adventures fall from the 1980s through the present day, with the vast majority taking place during the 1990s, which is when the original Delta Green came out. It was early 90s, if I remember correctly. The Fall of Delta Green takes place in the 60s. So in the Fall of Delta Green is still an officially sanctioned government agency that no one knows about. So think of an agency like DARPA that no one knows about outside of just a handful of people and some of the agents. One aspect of Delta Green that's pretty interesting is sometimes you'll have agents who don't realize that they're agents of Delta Green. That happens a bit more with the Arc Dream Publishing setting as opposed to the Fall of Delta Green, I would assume, but still. As far as character creation, it's pretty easy. So you're going to start off with some abilities that you automatically have points in. And then you have a pool of points you can spend, and you can spend those to increase your various different abilities. There are templates that make life a lot easier, actually really nicely put together. And you just simply spend a bunch of points on those, and then you'll get to add those templates to your character sheet, which are going to boost your various different abilities. So pretty cool. And of course, we do have various different police agency templates. We've got military templates, FBI, CIA, and so forth. We'll also get into a discussion about We'll also get a breakdown in detail about all of the various different abilities and how they're utilized. So that's pretty cool, like that. Now, I will point out that the Gumshoe system isn't necessarily, at least the way it's laid out here, isn't necessarily the most intuitively presented role playing game system I've encountered. It can be a little clunky, especially if you're coming from a role playing game that utilizes D20 or a dice pool of six-sided dice, or maybe percentile dice, right? Like Call of Cthulhu, like Delta Green. Could be a little bit tricky. Now, there is crunch to the fall of Delta Green that you might not be expecting as far as combat goes. Granted, this is scene based and it is theater of the mind. And it's not overly tactical in its combat approach, but there are different things that kind of change the rules a little bit. As an example, right off the bat, we've got the different kinds of abilities where some you'll roll dice to see if you succeed, some you don't. And you can spend points from your pools for those abilities. So, as an example, if you had 3 points in an ability, you can spend 3 points to either, if it's a general ability, improve your chances of succeeding, or if it was an investigative ability, improve the amount of information or the legitimacy of clues that you garner. So there's also rules about how you refresh these pools, and they work differently. So even though this feels really rules light to start off with, it's not as rules light as you may think. Although I will point out, I would assume that once you've wrapped your head around, especially as the handler, that's where I think it's not as intuitive as it could have been. And it's a little bit clunky in its execution, not terribly, just a little bit. I think it's from the handler end, not necessarily the player's end. So let's talk about the big selling point of the fall of Delta Green, because it's not the Gumshoe system. I'll tell you that right now. It is the setting, it is the sheer amount of really interesting content written by Ken Hite. Ken Hite has a reputation of putting together some really fantastic Lovecraftian inspired Cthulhu mythos sort of content out there. And that is most certainly the case here with the fall of Delta Green. I absolutely love it. I will tell you that it's certainly very, very easy for you to just simply port over all of the various different setting info over to Call of Cthulhu or Delta Green if you wanted to. But it is so well done. And I got to say, there's a lot that you could be doing with the fall of Delta Green, because think of what's going on in the 1960s. I mean, I can easily come up with a dozen concepts for scenarios and even campaigns for the fall of Delta Green, simply set in Vietnam or here in the States. So, love that. I think that is very, very cool. I could easily see a handler putting on White Rabbit by Jefferson Airplane as you begin an adventure that's taking place in the jungles of Vietnam. Maybe there's a mythos temple that the agents are looking to uncover. Really, really cool. Really nicely done. And this is the section here that we start getting into the handler's eyes only. So the first portion of the book is devoted to character creation, as well as the rules of the game, how to play, details about the various different abilities, and the world at large as far as the agents would understand it. Then we get into the handler's eyes only. This is where we're going to start getting into a bestiary, We're going to get into far more information about these shadowy organizations, including Delta Green. And we have an introductory adventure, really, really well done. And we get kind of the history of what's going on, discussion about Majestic and Delta Green. We get a timeline, which you could easily utilize for designing your own scenarios as well as campaigns. Speaking of scenarios and campaigns, unfortunately, and the reality is, I do ding the final review score of The Fall of Delta Green because there's not a lot of supplemental content that's been created for The Fall of Delta Green. We do have the recently released Borellis Connection, which had successfully kickstarted and then had some serious delays. And outside of that, I believe there are a couple of PDF only releases for The Fall of Delta Green. One of them is Las Vegas, which I think would be really cool because there's another location you could certainly do some really cool mythos related adventures with the mob and who's running Vegas and who's really running Vegas, who's really running the mob, stuff like that. I think that would be excellent. But there's just not much content out there. This has been out there for 6 years, and we have the new campaign that has arrived, at least in print, this year, and then a couple of PDFs. And that's really unfortunate because there's so much to recommend The Fall of Delta Green. Now, does that mean that you couldn't port over maybe some Delta Green adventures from Art Dream Publishing? Yeah, I guess. But one thing that I do like about The Fall of Delta Green is, yes, this is dark, this is creepy, it's spooky. It's got the conspiracy. It's got that, 1960s X-Files vibe. Whereas Delta Green has that 1980s and on R-rated X-Files vibe. I don't find The Fall of Delta Green to be as problematic in ways that I find a lot of the Delta Green adventures, or at least some of the Delta Green adventures that are out there, because some of the Delta Green adventures really do delve into topics that a lot of people around their game table do not feel comfortable with. Not as much with The Fall of Delta Green. I will also mention, though, The Fall of Delta Green is not a role-playing game that's designed for little kids. There are going to be sanity-shaking events. There are going to be things that are going on in this game that will freak the shit out of your players, obviously enough, but maybe not in the same way that Delta Green does. And I do like that. I think that's a selling point of The Fall of Delta Green. Once again, I just wish there was more content out there that's been created. I'm not aware of much third-party content for The Fall of Delta Green either. But as you can see, this book is absolutely packed with goodness. This entire section I've been paging through for about the past minute is all about running the game and how to get the right vibe with the game. We do have an introductory adventure too, which is really well done. It is Operation Aladdin's Cave, and it does take place in Vietnam. So I thought that was very cool. So it's important to keep in mind that we do at least get an introductory adventure, which right away when I review core books for role-playing games, if we don't have any sort of introductory adventure, that always kind of leaves me cold. All right, so then we're going to get our character record sheets. We've got various different player aids as well. Get a summary of combat. And then thank you to the Kickstarter backers. That is a look inside The Fall of Delta Green from Pelgrane Press, written by Ken Hite. Let's swing on over to the other camera so I can share some final thoughts and give this a review score. As I pointed out before, in my opinion, I don't think the Gumshoe system is the big selling point for the fall of Delta Green. I like the Gumshoe system, don't get me wrong. I like the fact that players earn clues based upon the abilities that they have, not necessarily because they roll good dice. So I do like that a lot. In fact, you can check out my written review I did for Bubble Gumshoe years ago, which I loved. I thought it was excellent. And like I said, I do like the Gumshoe system. I just don't necessarily think it's the big selling point for the fall of Delta Green. I think the big selling point is all the setting. Now, I know some people would refer to it as fluff. I don't look at it as that. Fluff is useless, or it's just like flavored text would be. That's not the case with the fall of Delta Green. There is a lot of really great information, a lot of things that are going to get the creative juices flowing for game masters out there as well. Ken Hite's name's on it right away. That is going to be an indication it's quality. I mean, it pretty much comes with the territory of having Ken's name on something. But once again, I am disappointed that we do not have a lot of content for the fall of Delta Green. In fact, almost none outside of the recently released Borellis Connection, which of course, stay tuned because I am going to have a review of that in the very near future. I should also point out, as I record this, there is a Kickstarter going on for the second edition of The Trail of Cthulhu, which has been around for a good amount of time, does utilize the Gumshoe system, and that is more of your traditional H.P. Lovecraft Cthulhu mythos sort of role-playing game, once again, where the players don't miss out on clues simply because they have bad dice rolls. So, and I am kind of curious as far as the second edition of the Trail of Cthulhu, because it's going to essentially, at least I would think, sort of have a second edition of the Gumshoe system. So I'm kind of curious if there are going to be some tweaks to that. Fingers crossed. I know it's a successful Kickstarter. Fingers crossed when it comes out, maybe we'll get an opportunity to review it. But back to the fall of Delta Green. I do like this quite a lot. I really do. I will say, not as much as Sammy did. Sammy gave this a 9.5 in her written review. I certainly recommend The Fall of Delta Green. I just think 6 years on, not having a lot of content, got to ding it a little bit. Gumshoe system's not as intuitive as I would like it to be as far as a game master's approach, but man, the content in here is excellent. So on a scale of 0 to 10, I give The Fall of Delta Green an 8.5 out of 10. Certainly recommend it. Really do like it. Have some quibbles. But if you're into Lovecraftian role-playing games and you happen to run Lovecraftian role-playing games and you like the idea of the setting of the 1960s, as well as that X-Files conspiracy vibe, you certainly will want to have The Fall of Delta Green in your collection. All right, that is it for this time out. If you like the video, by all means, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already. And if you do subscribe, don't forget, ring that bell. It'll not only let you know when I share videos such as this review, it'll also inform you when my live stream, the Gaming Gang Dispatch, airs Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday evenings right here on YouTube at 7 p.m. Central. Of course, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for all latest in tabletop gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more you are not going to find on YouTube. You know the drill. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. Thank you very much for watching. Once again, I'm Jeff McAleer, and until I see you next time, I certainly hope all of you get to enjoy plenty of great gaming with your gang.